One. Here we go. Welcome back to One American Baseball Podcast. You're joining us for episode 25. If you're watching on the YouTube, you'll see that we're joined by a special guest today. Mr. Jose Ramirez is recording with Chris, as Chris is recording from his iPhone due to a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're going to get through it because that's what professionals do. Chris, how are you?
I'm trying to get through it. The show must go on. As you said, I'm on my phone right now. Audio wasn't working on my laptop, but we're gonna make it work today. Had our softball debut last night. This is a baseball podcast. Anything goes on here. Yeah, it was a 9:30 game last night, and it's kind of a late night. So I'm not don't have a whole lot of sleep under my belt, but I'm trying to get through it.
Yeah, we'll get through it and we'll talk some ball with everyone.
Yeah.
So what we're going to get into this week's episode, we're going to do our weekly takeaways as always. Now, those are going to be from last week. It's a little bit of a later record date for us this week. We had some scheduling things earlier in the week, like Chris mentioned. We had our first rec softball game yesterday that we might talk about that in a later episode at some point.
Yeah.
But we're going to get into some weekly recap stuff. Then we're going to do a draft recap. The draft happened last Sunday. So if you were following along with that, you might have seen some of the picks, but we're going to discuss what we think about some of the earlier picks in the draft. There are like 20 rounds, so we're not going to get into every round. And then lastly, the All-Star break was this week. So we had the Home Run Derby and the All-Star game. And that's another reason we're recording late. We wanted to be able to talk about those things on the podcast. So we'll get into that at the very end. But let's go ahead and get started with the weekly takeaways, and I'll start with my Red Legs. Chris, the last week of baseball that the Reds played was quite a concerning one. I'm sure you know that based on some of my
Oh,
complaints.
I do, believe me. Our
Yeah,
our our off camera conversations, yeah, I get the full picture.
it was ugly last week at times. So the Reds played the Marlins and the Rockies. They had the Marlins in a four-game set and the Rockies in a three-game set. And I think what that week proved to me was that this isn't a playoff team yet. This is a 82, 83 win ball club, and that's just not going to be good enough this year. I mean, the stretch of baseball that they played was the most important point of their season to date. They're playing 7 games at their home ballpark right before the All-Star break. 7 games against teams that you should beat, that you can really make up some ground in playoff races with some wins, and they came out flat. I hesitate to say it was embarrassing, but it was kind of embarrassing at points how poorly they played against these teams. They came into the week 2.5 games out of a wild card spot, and they went into the break 2.5 games back still. So they didn't make up any ground in a week where they played the Marlins and then the Rockies. Now, granted, the Giants were playing good baseball, so it's hard to make up ground on them, but it felt like this was a week where they really needed to put some distance in between them and the 500 watermark, and they didn't really do it. Like I said, they needed to make ground. They staying level wasn't really an option, but they didn't lose ground either. I mean, silver lining, they didn't. They're still only 2.5 games back. They aren't 5.5 games back now. They didn't bury themselves like they've been doing all year. They're a very frustrating team because of that. They don't really ever play their best baseball, but they never really play their worst baseball either. And I think that's why, this is just a mid team. They're probably, 2 games over 500 at the end of the season, how things stand currently. I think, a real contender, a team that really has a shot at the playoffs as they're currently constructed, goes into that schedule like we did, and they probably win 6 games. They probably take 3 from the Marlins and they sweep the Rockies because you shouldn't lose a game to the 2025 Rockies. And they go into the All-Star break red hot, and you've got a lot of positive momentum about your season. Really, they looked worn down the last week that they played. The Rockies stayed in all three games this series, and the offense really never looked like it found its stride, except for Game 4 of the Marlins series. That was sort of the best game that they played from an all-around perspective um, in the last week. And like I said, you shouldn't the 2025 Colorado Rockies should never give you a close game. It shouldn't be a thing that happens. And every game that we played against them, it was like a barn burner. Like I was worried that we were going to lose to the Colorado Rockies, and we did in game one of that series. And God forbid, but we almost lost to them in game two of the series, which I was at, and that was maybe one of the least fun experiences I've ever had actually watching a game in a ballpark. It was 90 some degrees. We were sitting up in the left field bleachers, so the sun's beating right down on us. And I mean, we made the Colorado Rockies look like the Los Angeles Dodgers for for 8.5 innings, and it was I was not happy. I'll just say that. This is a stretch of their schedule there where they played 10 days straight, so there's that. Maybe that's part of the reason they looked so worn out. And, you know, hopefully the All-Star break is what it is. It's a break for them and they get the rest that they need and they make the second half push that's going to be necessary for this team to finally make the playoffs and win a playoff series. I'm concerned about Tyler Stevenson at the plate. I'm highly concerned about Tyler Stevenson at the plate, really. He looks absolutely lost. He took some very low quality at bats this last week, and he's just watching way too many strikes go by without even taking the bat off his shoulders. I mean, it's pretty rough. He's first percentile in strikeout rate, 10th percentile in whiff percent, and third percentile in expected batting average, all from Baseball Savant. And if you know anything about percentiles, those are not very good numbers. That means that he's in the bottom 1% when it comes to strikeout percent. He's striking out 99% more than, league average or whatever. And that's just not what you need. He also plays league average defense at his best. When he's at his best as a catcher, he's playing league average defense. He's not, playing great defense like like you need from a catcher if they're not going to produce offensively. So that's a problem as well. I don't think he's the catcher of the future that we've been led to believe that he is. He's I'm like I said, I'm really worried about Tyler Stevenson. Um, I am beginning to think that you make Jose Trevino the starter and Stevenson the backup. Trevino is having a career year. He's putting together quality at bats. He's got double digit doubles, I think, this season, and he plays better defense than Tyler Stevenson. So, I think you start Trevino um, and move Stevenson to backup or DH or whatever. I don't really want to see him DH because he's not hitting. And the whole point of DHing is you're a designated hitter. He's not really doing that. Be more like a designated strikeout or something like that. But I've also seen some things that Stevenson might be traded at the trade deadline. I don't know if I'm in love with that because as we saw last year as Reds fans, good backup catchers are hard to come by. And while Stevenson isn't playing great this year, he's better than your average backup catcher. And we really don't have anyone else who could back him up if we trade him or back Trevino up if we trade Stevenson. So I don't know if I like that. He is on an expiring deal though, so maybe it makes sense. But yeah, he really needs to have a big second half for me to think that he deserves a contract extension going forward from this team. I think the bullpen also needs a lot of help. The bullpen is bottom 10 in strikeouts per nine and strikeout percentage, while also being bottom 10 in walks per nine and walk percentage. And that's about the worst bullpen you can put together. You're giving guys free passes, letting them on base for free. They don't have to work at all to get on base. And then you can't wiggle out of jams that you yourself create because you can't get guys out via the strikeout. So let's say you walk a guy, he bunts a guy over, he's on second, ground ball through a hole in the infield. Now corners one out, and sack fly because you can't strike anyone out. So you've given up a run simply because you walked a guy and you can't strike anyone out. It's a concerning trend that I'm noticing a lot with this bullpen, and it definitely needs to be addressed because this bullpen year in and year out has been a problem for this team, and it's never really been addressed properly the way it should be. I'm hoping at the trade deadline it is, but right now this bullpen is not in a spot where it's a competitive bullpen in this league. And then my last takeaway from this week is just that it's a pretty Sisyphean experience of being a Reds fan. You know, you feel like you're constantly pushing the boulder uphill, and there's really no end in sight when it comes to getting to the top of the hill. You come into the season excited. You're promised contending baseball from whoever is giving all the interviews that off season, Nick Kroll or the ownership or whoever. We're gonna come out this year and we're really looking to compete. We've signed ex free agent who obviously is not. It's for the past couple of years that hasn't really worked out. It's been Mike Moustakas and Jamer Candelario, which have been two abysmal free agent signings. But they signed one of those guys. Oh look, we're all in this year. We're gonna compete. They have an underwhelming April. They get hot in June and get into the playoff race. They play bad in July. And then, August rolls around and they get hot again and they pull you right back in. You're a couple, oh, look at that. We're only 2.5 out of the wild card again. This team's right in it. And then they completely unravel in September. I'm hoping this is the year we get to the top of the hill because despite all their struggles, this team has stayed right in the thick of it and is hanging in there. Like I mentioned earlier, they they aren't playing themselves out of it despite playing some individually very ugly games. And the front office has said they want to win now. This front office has made empty promises before though, so I don't really know how much you can trust it, but you hope they realize that this is our window and we need to be in win now mode. Ellie De La Cruz is going to be here until 2029. He's gone after that. We're probably not playing baseball in 2027. That seems to be the rumor from everything I've heard is that baseball's probably not going to happen in 2027 with the collective bargaining agreement ending. Um, so, you've got this year, 2026 and 2028. You've got 3 years of Ali De La Cruz left. So, if this really is, if you really are in win now mode and you understand that this is your window to compete, you need to prove it to me this year's trade deadline. Don't go into the deadline and do like a soft buy or a soft sell because you're going to lose the fan base at that point. You have to prove to this fan base, a fan base that's starved for playoff success, that you really mean it when you say you want to compete now. And my last hope for this is that Tito is known for some really great second half pushes. You know that as a Guardians fan. But this team, this franchise historically is known for some second half collapses. So it's sort of who's going to win out there. It's a battle of good and evil. We have the second toughest remaining schedule per fan graphs. So only the Boston Red Sox play a tougher schedule this half of the season than we do. It's concerning, but at the same time, this team has played to the level of their competition all year. So, that's encouraging. Like I said, we played some of the worst baseball we've played all season against the Marlins and the Rockies, coming off playing some of the best baseball we've played all season against teams like the Yankees and the Phillies. So, maybe there's some truth to that, and playing a harder schedule won't hurt this team as much as people think it might. Um, I went back and looked at some of Tito's seasons with the Guardians to see if I could draw any comparisons um, to this year's Reds teams and any of his successful teams in Cleveland. And I think the 2022 season looks quite similar to how our season is going up to this point. They were 2 games above 500 heading into the break. We're 3 games over 500. We were 3 games over 500 going into the break, and they finished as a 92 win team, and they took the Yankees to 5 games in the ALDS. Is that something that we could see here in Cincinnati? I hope. Do you remember anything about that 2022 season? Any trades or waiver wire pickups, or did that team just get hot at the right time?
Well, you brought back a bad memory of of the ALDS with that
Yeah.
with that rain out. The Yankees were going to have a bullpen game in Game 5 of the ALDS, and then Shane Bieber was going to start Game 5. He was on schedule to start, and then yeah, it got rained out, and then we ended up facing I forget it. I don't think Carlos Rodon was there yet, but we might have faced Garrett Cole. I
Hmm.
don't know, one of their really good starters at the time. Um, we faced in that 22 series, but no, we didn't really. The Guardians didn't really do anything at the deadline that year. They weren't really expected to do anything in 22 because in 21 they went 80 and 82,
Hmm.
and they were kind of in rebuild mode, and yeah, like they weren't expected to do anything. So they just got really hot at the right time. They just started playing some really fundamentally good baseball, and that's when they kind of got their guards ball, whatever you want to call it, mantra. When it really took steam because they were running the bases the right way. They were playing really good defense. They were getting timely hits. Yeah, just overall playing clean brand of baseball. So I think Tito had a lot to do with that. So
Yeah.
it was a young team that had a lot of aspirations. So I think just a lot of good things happened at the right time for that team. So
Yeah. Well, hopefully it's, the same here in Cincinnati this year, but we will get into the Guardians last week of baseball and you can lead us through that.
yeah, I think your Sisyphean your Sisyphean experience I can definitely relate to, but in a different
Hmm.
way because like when the Indians were making their playoff runs in the mid to late 2010s, they had, I've talked about it before, like they had their Lindor and Ramirez core, and then they had Encarnacion, they had Jay Bruce, like they had a really stacked team. They had Austin Jackson, Brandon Geyer, um, like Cody Allen in the bullpen, Trevor Bauer, like yeah, Corey Kluber, all those guys. They had a stacked roster. One of the best rosters, one of the best teams on paper in baseball in the mid to late 2010s. And then the Guardians started to cheap out a little bit. The Indians started to cheap out. And it's kind of been that way. Like the new wave in the MLB is doing a lot with the little. And I feel like the Rays and the Guardians are really at the forefront of that. And I don't know when the next time we're going to see Cleveland spending a lot of money on free agents is like how they did in the mid to late 2010s when their World Series and playoff runs and stuff. I feel like they're lucking into it like every other year with because they get a new haul of prospects. But it really is frustrating because Jose is 32 years old and he's not going to be playing MVP caliber baseball forever. I mean, if I had to guess, he'd probably have, until the end of next season. Like you said, they're probably not going to be baseball in 2027. Then 2028, that's Jose's going to be 35 and 28. I mean, yeah, you don't really expect a 35-year-old to be playing top five MVP caliber baseball. Um, so I could definitely relate when it comes to like being like for the Guardians, they were so close to winning a World Series, and they get so close in the playoffs. Um, and in 22, they almost got to ALCS. Um, Last year, the ALCS wasn't as close as or it, it was a lot closer than it seemed like on paper. Uh, a few things went the Guardians' way, and that could have been a completely different series in the ALCS. But the Dodgers would have steamrolled them. Anyways,
Hmm.
I think my stance that the Guardians just they've gotten so close, and then it seems like they're just going in the wrong direction now. And yeah, it just doesn't seem like they had a good week. They won 6-1, coming off the 10-game losing streak. They did kind of the bare minimum of what they had to do, considering that 10-game losing streak was so rough. Um, they really should have won all 7 games. The one blemish was that really tough 5-4 loss last Saturday against the White Sox, where Colby Allard was the last man in the bullpen in that doubleheader. The Guardians are historically really bad in doubleheaders, so honestly, the fact that we split that doubleheader is fine. but we had such a good chance of winning that game two, the doubleheader. It just kind of hurts. But the Guardians are sitting at 47 and 50. They are 46 and 49. They're 4.5 games out of the wild card. And I think the tough thing about where the Guardians stand right now is that there are five teams ahead of really six teams if you count Seattle. There are six teams ahead of the Guardians uh for the wild card, the third and final wild card spot. Got Tampa Bay, Texas, Angels, um, Twins, and Royals ahead of Cleveland. So 4.5 games out, but it seems like they're a lot farther out than they really are. Um, but the tough thing about it is that with the AL combined with the NL, there are really 22 teams that are still in this thing that could buy in at the All-Star break. So that's going to make the deadline really, I think, kind of underwhelming because nobody's really going to be selling, and nobody's really going to like the market's just going to be oversaturated. The big buyers are going to take everybody, all the top, all the top guys on the market. Like the Dodgers, those type of teams, Yankees. Yeah, they're gonna add. They're probably gonna add at the All-Star break, but the teams such as the Guardians, the smaller market teams that are still in it, I don't think it's realistic to say that these smaller market teams are going to really move the needle at the deadline. So that's kind of the double-edged sword of the three wild card teams in each league for the playoffs now. It's I feel like it's a lot more fair for um, because the Indians won 93 games in 2019 and missed the playoffs. That just shouldn't happen. So I feel like it's a little bit more fair in that aspect for teams to have a better shot at making the playoffs that actually deserve it. But that makes the trade deadline pretty boring. So I mean, overall, it's a trade off. Um, so it's kind of a front office's worst nightmare because the trade deadline it's really become the off season is really the only time that an organization can really move the needle. Um, and I feel like it's not really like that in any other sports league. Um, and I feel like that kind of adds to the lockout that's impending in a couple years because the players, like they most likely don't want to be moving in the middle of the season, but it kind of adds to it because there's just less transactions going on. There's less opportunities for players to take. In the middle of the season. So I feel like that's sort of an anti-player thing overall that's going on in the MLB as well. So I don't really have much to say about this past week for the Guardians, other than they did the bare minimum of what they had to do, and they're still in the playoff race somehow. I have seen some trade rumors pop up for Stephen Kwan, Emmanuel Clase. Those names have been thrown around a lot. Um, I think I said last week in our previous episode, I don't think it's very likely that Stephen Kwan's going to be traded unless um, unless the Guardians really take a nosedive after the All-Star break leading up to deadline. Um, yeah, I still wouldn't rule out an Emmanuel Clase trade. Um, I've seen some outlets say that Carlos Santana is on the trade block. I just don't see how he has any trade value. I don't think any team would. I, the Giants were a potential suitor for Carlos Santana. He doesn't really move the needle for the Giants at all because they have Rafael Devers and they have a ton of options at first base and DH. So I don't think he'd be a good fit for the Giants. But yeah, with that said, that's about all I have for this week of Guardians baseball. They have the bright spot is that they have the 25th the 25th strongest schedule in the MLB going forward the rest of the season. And the next basically month of baseball, the Guardians are playing sub 500 teams. So they should be able to rack up some wins and get back in the All-Star race or the wild card race. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. The Guardians have been really good against sub 500 teams this year, so that has been one good thing about the Guardians this year is they take care of business when they need to. So yeah, that's all I have.
Yeah. One thing I do want to touch on real quick is that with the Stephen Kwan trade rumors, I think it was ESPN who put out a trade package where Kwan goes to the Reds, and I just want to say that I'm a I'm a huge Stephen Kwan fan. I think he's one of the best contact hitters in baseball, but I don't love that trade for the Reds. I think, what what Stephen Kwan offers isn't really what this team needs. This team needs some more power in the outfield. They don't really need a contact bat who's going to play good defense in the outfield. Would Stephen Kwan be nice to have on this team? Sure. Any team would love to have Stephen Kwan on their roster, but I don't think that he's going to move the needle for this team as much as, say, uh, I don't know. A Riley Greenwood. Now the Tigers aren't going to trade Riley Green, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I was trying to think of just a power bat that,
I
um,
don't think there's really any power bats in the outfield that are on the block.
not
Uh,
really. Is That's part of the problem too, because
yeah,
Buxton has a no trade clause. I've seen him
yeah.
linked to the Reds a little bit, but Buxton has a no trade clause, and he gave an interview saying that he's gonna basically use it if they ever try to trade him. He said he wants to stay a Twin forever.
Well,
So,
the thing, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, the thing is that the Twins are closer to the playoffs than the Guardians are.
right.
They're two. I have it pulled up here. They're 4 games back of the wild card, so they're 47 and 49.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Here's an interesting thing though that showed up on my feed the other day, and this is off topic, but I would like to
mhm.
talk about it. Um, a power bat that the Reds were linked to was Kyle Schwarber. Kyle Schwarber is from Middleton, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, and he gave an interview where he was basically like, yeah, if the opportunity arose, I would love to play for the Reds. They're my hometown club. That would be super cool. Now, the problem with that is that's all well and good to hear. The Phillies aren't going to trade Kyle Schwarber at the deadline. The
Yeah,
Phillies are in the midst of the NL East race. They want to win that division. They probably have a few more years. Maybe this is even their last year to really
their
have a shot
last
at a World Series title. Um, and you aren't going to trade Schwarber when this is your last year to really contend for a World Series title. They don't have anyone who could replace Kyle Schwarber. It's not like a Red Sox situation where they have a log jam, so they might move a guy even if they're playing well. The Phillies aren't going to do that. Now, Schwarber is on an expiring contract, and if something doesn't work out with the Phillies in the offseason, maybe then he comes to Cincinnati. But that's something we're going to be talking about in January or December of next year, this coming winter. It's not going to happen at the deadline, which sucks. But, Kyle Schwarber, this is my official pitch. Come to Cincinnati. It'd be awesome. I would love to have Schwarber on the team. I know, you know, you have a lot of feelings towards Kyle Schwarber, and a lot of them are negative because he
yeah,
was a Cub. But I'm willing to put his Cubs past behind him if he wants to come play in the Wishbone Sea.
yeah. Kyle Schwarber wasn't as I guess abrasive to me. Uh, I mean, he played a huge role in that 2016 World Series, kind of randomly because he had that ACL tear that he
Hmm.
came back super fast. So I don't know if the Cubs would have won the World Series without him, but there were a lot less likable players on that 16 Cubs team. I'll just
Yeah,
say that.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think Kyle Schwarber would mash in Great American Ballpark.
I
He'd
yeah,
he'd
you might
be, he'd be a 50 home run guy
Yeah,
every
you
year.
might see some in the river if Kyle Schwarber comes to play in Cincinnati, which would be awesome. I'm all for it. But like I said, I don't want to get too ahead of myself there. That's just a little bit of daydreaming. But
Yeah,
here are guys that are actually going to be in our system. Now they're in our system now. Let's get into the draft recap. So the Reds picked ninth overall in the first round, and they took Steele Hall. He is a high school shortstop out of Alabama. He's 17 years old, so he's super young, and we aren't going to see him for a while. But it was a surprising pick at the time. I think, I don't think a lot of people thought we were going to take a high school shortstop there, but we did. And I think it follows the Reds draft strategy as of late, which is take guys who play up the middle because they're the most athletic players on the diamond, typically in high school and in college. A shortstop is just the most athletic guy on the team. And if you need to move him somewhere after you draft him, typically they're going to be able to do that because they're athletes. Steele Hall is a very high ceiling guy. Um, but he's 17, so he's not a finished product yet. But the ceiling is high. Right now, the tools that scouts like are his speed and field tools. He struggles with the bat, especially with swing decisions. But scouts think that he can develop into a better hitter with some work. And like I said, he's only 17. So, even guys like Ellie De La Cruz, who debut really young, don't debut till they're 21. Jackson Churio debuted when he was 20. So he's still got, 3 to 4 years, even being one of the youngest guys in the league. So that's a lot of time to develop. And, 17 years old, your body is probably isn't even really done growing at that point. So he's got a lot of time to develop and mature, especially with the bat, because that's something that you can work on. He draws comparisons to Dansby Swanson and Trey Turner. Those are both really great comparisons. I love those a lot. Both these guys, plus defenders for their entire career and have been above league average for their career as well. So, those are comps that you like to hear from your first round draft pick. Um, in rounds 2 and 3, we took two right-handed pitchers. We took a high school arm, Aaron Watson, and a college arm, Mason Morris. Aaron Watson, the high school arm, is described as a pitcher and not a thrower. So, what people mean by that is he doesn't really have the velo that jumps off the page at you, but he's got good control and stuff. Think of like an Andrew Abbott type if you're a Reds fan. Andrew Abbott not really blowing guys away with the fastball, but he throws a lot of good breaking stuff, mixes speeds well, and locates well. And that's what makes him a good pitcher. I personally really like this pick. Velo is the name of the game in today's era of baseball. Everyone wants to throw 100, but some guys just aren't physically capable of that. And we've seen how the Reds can develop guys who aren't throwing 100 miles an hour, but have good stuff and have good breaking stuff. Again, Andrew Abbott, he was an all-star this year, and he's maxing out at 95 on his four-seamer. So, the Reds have proven that they can develop this kind of talent. And personally, I think, there's a lower injury risk with these guys. They're not blowing out their elbow trying to throw 100. And I'll take good location over 100 miles an hour any day of the week, I think. Mason Morris, he was a relief pitcher at Ole Miss. The Reds think they can transition him to a starter. Right now, he's a two-pitch pitcher with a cutter and a slider. He also throws a fastball, but it's not really effective. It doesn't miss barrels, and he would need to develop a changeup to be a starter in the big leagues. Um, think of him sort of as a Graham Ashcraft type. Graham Ashcraft he was a starter throughout his time in the Reds system up until this year, and he really only threw a cutter and a slider. And Reds fans saw how poorly that worked out for him when he was a starter. Out of the bullpen, he's been great. So if the Reds can get Mason Morris to throw a better fastball and develop a changeup, he has a shot at being a starter. But, you know, I don't think it's a bad thing to have him in your system, even if he's not going to become a starter, because as we've seen, pitching depth is invaluable. That's, you want to have as much pitching depth as possible. And pitchers also have good trade value because pitching depth is such an important thing. Teams always need surplus arms. So, whenever you have guys that, oh, we have this guy in the minor leagues and he's probably not going to hack it in our system, but this team desperately needs a pitcher, so they're willing to give up. probably more than they should for him. You know, pitchers have good trade value because of that. And then in the fourth round, the Reds got maybe the steal of the draft, Mason Neville, an outfielder from Oregon. He was ranked as the 35th prospect heading into the draft. So that's late round one, early round two, you know, or that in between competitive balance round where people thought that's where he was ranked to be picked. He led the NCAA in homers this year. He can cover all three outfield spots, has great speed, great arm. The swing and a miss was a concern early on in his college days, but he cut down on that this year. He's drawn comps to Cody Bellinger, and like I said, I really love this pick. I think the Reds really got a steal here, maybe the steal of the draft. He's a left-handed hitter and a left-handed thrower, so immediately I thought Jay Bruce when I saw this. So I would love to have another Jay Bruce at some point for this team.
Yeah, that's definitely. I feel like the Reds had a little bit of a better draft than the Guardians, a little bit more exciting prospects for the Reds. The Guardians, I really wanted them to get a catcher in an earlier round, and they waited till the 11th round to draft a catcher. So the catcher they got was Tyler Howard out of Portland. Um, he had a 978 OPS in college. The thing is, like, people's OPSs are so inflated in college. It's really hard to look into it that much. But yeah, he batted 379, so he has good bat to ball skills. But we'll just have to wait and see where how Tyler Howard fits into the depth chart of in the Guardians system. And the Guardians drafted another catcher named Cannon Peebles out of Tennessee. He hit to a 818 OPS in college ball this past spring. Um, I definitely read a little bit more into the stats if they go to like a big school,
Mhm.
SEC, ACC, that kind of thing. Um, so Tyler Howard in Portland might have been a little bit inflated offense wise. So I always take that into consideration with hitters at least. But the Guardians' first round draft pick, I think it got kind of mixed. There's kind of mixed thoughts on this pick for the Guardians. It's a little bit unorthodox from what the Guardians usually pick. They usually go for a middle infielder who can play a lot of different positions and can move to a different position later in their career. Super athletic, good bat to ball skills. They don't really specialize in power, but this guy, Jace LaViolette, hit 29 home runs, 78 RBIs this past college season. He hits an 1175 OPS. He had he was at Texas A&M. He had 84 strikeouts to 61 walks in 334 plate appearances. So he had about a 25% strikeout rate. Throughout his whole college career, his strikeout rate was about 25%. So it's a little bit on the high side. I was listening to Locked On Guardians guys, and I'm kind of cheating off of them for a lot of their draft outlook because the advanced stats for college guys were behind a paywall for me to look at. So they probably know what they're talking about a little bit better. But they were talking about his swing and miss rate in the zone, and that could end up being a pretty big issue because I mean if you're chasing pitches out of the zone, I feel like that's a little bit worse than swing and missing in the zone. I feel like swing and missing in the zone is a little bit more fixable, and he does walk a lot. So I could definitely see Jace LaViolette translating a little bit better in the big leagues as opposed to like a John Kenzie Noel. I think a lot of his archetypes are kind of similar to, you know, a big power guy. Just based off the way he's built, he reminds me kind of Jack Caglione. Um, just super stocky guy, 6'4", like 240, something like that. Like he's a big dude. He set the school record for home runs for Texas A&M throughout his career. So that's a pretty big deal. Um, I'm sorry. His 29 home runs were last spring in college ball. He regressed a little bit this year. He hit to 10.03 OPS with 18 home runs. Um, but overall, he's still a really promising prospect. I think that the reason he fell to 27 this year is because he regressed from the 24 to 25 season. So we might have gotten a steal. Um, we'll have to wait and see how Jace Laviolette pans out. But I don't really see him going above. I don't. He's not nearly as exciting. Doesn't kind of have the upside of Travis on it, at least at this point. Um, so I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about the Jace Laviolette pick. Um, so and then the Guardians had three picks between numbers 64 and 70 overall. So they went with a lot of college guys in this draft, which I thought was interesting. The next guy they selected was Dean Curley out of Tennessee. He's an infielder, a little bit under 1,000 OPS his this past season in college. Um, Aaron Walton out of Arizona. He's an outfielder, around 1,000 OPS this past year in college. So he should be a pretty decent bat. Have to wait and see how he pans out. And then Will Hines, prep arm out of high school. He's a right-handed pitcher. So um, yeah, we're not gonna see Will Hines for a while, but yeah, again, we'll have to wait and see how he pans out and slots into this farm system. But um, yeah, I just thought the Guardians' approach was very. It wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting a
Mhm.
lot more the same pattern from the Guardians, middle infielders, but I don't hate it overall. Um, again, have to wait and see how they pan out. So
Yeah, yeah, that's the tough thing with the Major League Baseball draft is, as US sports fans, we're very used to you draft a guy and you see him at training camp in the next like month or two. He's going to be on your professional team squad um in the next year, and with baseball it's not like that typically. I We've seen a pattern emerging now where guys will, be in the minors for half a season and then come up, guys like Paul Skeens and Chase Burns and things like that. But for the most part, when you draft a guy, you're not going to see him make an immediate impact on your team. And you might not see him make an impact for, 4 years, especially in the case of Steel Hall with the Reds. I don't foresee him making an impact while Ellie De La Cruz is still on this team, while we still have this core of players. I don't see Steel Hall, being a part of this core ever. Now, maybe a guy like Mason Neville helps out this core at the very end of their time, but even then I don't see him making a difference within a year or two like you often see in other sports. So it's always tough to say, was it a good draft? Was it a bad draft? You have to wait, like 4 years before you can really analyze how the draft went for a team, I feel like.
yeah, that's part of what makes it, I think, hard for people to get into the MLB is the draft is a pretty big event in a lot of other major sports. Like you
Right.
said, you NFL and like the NBA, you'll typically see somebody who's drafted within, a year at the worst of when they are drafted. And especially in the NFL, like your draft picks make a huge difference on your team. Your team can completely transform if you have a really good draft from one year to the next. So um, yeah, I think it really just leaves it up to like baseball nerds are like the only ones who are into the MLB draft. And admittedly, I wasn't really following the MLB draft until like it actually happened. So I wasn't really familiar with the college prospects and that kind of thing. I'd say I'm pretty big into prospects for the average baseball fan, but even I have my limits. So
Yeah, and too, with the draft, comparing it to other drafts that we see here in the US, with with an NFL or an NBA draft, teams aren't drafting, they're not drafting needs. It's typically the best available player. In the NFL, sometimes you might see like, oh, we need an offensive lineman, so we're going to take this guy. But typically it's, who's the best available player? That's who we're going to take.
Yeah,
And it's not like that in the MLB. The Reds are always taking shortstops and pitchers, because, that's what this organization feels it needs to build its core on is pitchers and guys who you can rely on their athleticism to play wherever you need them to play.
yeah, definitely. And the way that the workflow for MLB front offices like is not sexy at all when it comes to drafting. There's so many things that like there's a lot of analytics in every sport, but I feel like in baseball it's very there's a lot more analytics and stuff to consider, especially with how because there's so much development time
Mm,
with like half works in the minor leagues and what kind of players they develop the best and what sort of personalities come from that as well. Because there's a lot of time they spend in the minor leagues, sort of growing before they make their debut. So it's not like in the NFL where there's you need a quarterback, so you're just going to draft a quarterback, and then that's your franchise quarterback, and that completely changes the complexity of your franchise. That is rarely ever the case in baseball, except for a few unicorns. So
yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's the draft talk, and we probably won't think about the MLB draft again until this time next year because, like Chris said, the MLB draft is not something that even some of the biggest baseball nerds can get into. And,
yeah,
admittedly, this year's class was a little weak.
it
So,
was it was
maybe
100.
maybe next year there's a guy that lights up the college scene and everyone's clamoring about him. But yeah, that's enough draft talk. That'll hold me over until All-Star break 2026. But let's get into the All-Star Week recap to finish out this episode. The Home Run Derby happened on Monday, and Cal Raleigh won it all. Surprise, surprise. The major league leader in home runs ends up winning the Home Run Derby, which I feel like is a rarer occurrence than, people think it might be. He's the first catcher to ever win the Derby and the second Mariner to win it after Griffey. Now, Griffey won it, I think, 3 times. So the Mariners have 4 Home Run Derby wins, but this is their second player to win it. I think Junior Caminero shocked a lot of people by making it to the final round. I was I was not shocked. I actually put $5 on Caminero to win it, and then switched my bet with like 5 minutes to go before the Derby started because I let the ESPN people get in my head about James Wood. James Wood didn't even make it out of the first round. So I was gonna be pretty upset if Junior Caminero did end up winning, but I just want to say that I did have him performing well in the Derby. Um, and then O'Neal Cruz hit a ball 513 feet. I mean, I also didn't expect O'Neal Cruz to do as well as he did. I thought it would be, he would hit some pretty impressive home runs, but I thought he wouldn't hit a ton because I thought he'd just be lining them off the wall there in Atlanta in right field. It's a pretty high wall, and he's, a line drive hitter. But he really impressed me, and he hitting a ball 513 feet. I think it's the fifth furthest hit ball ever in home run derby history. So yeah, it was a pretty cool derby. I enjoyed it. I don't know if I'm in love with the format, but the home run derby is always a ton of fun to watch.
Yeah, I think I see with players sometimes is it helps or harms their swing after they
Right.
do. I feel like O'Neal Cruz is a guy who can really benefit from the home run derby
Mm.
because you saw it like he kind of honed in on getting his launch angle up, and
Right.
that's something he really needs to work on, um, with just in his everyday games. And
Mhm.
you know, the home run derby, you can really unlock something in your swing. And, we might see, a 30, 40 home run campaign out of O'Neal Cruz in the next year or two. Um, because he does have the ability to, as you
Right.
said, hit the over 500 feet.
Yeah.
He can hit the ball 120 miles an hour. It's just a matter of getting a little bit of lift on the ball. So,
Right.
and he was able to do that. So he's putting it all together. It's just a matter of translating it over to a game setting.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Well, the All-Star game itself happened on Tuesday, and I thought it ended up being a very entertaining game. It was not so much there for quite a while. The NL got out to a quick lead. They were up 6-0, and the AL ended up rallying from down 6-0 to tie at 6-6. Stephen Kwan had the game tying RBI single, and it was, typical Stephen Kwan baseball. He just put the ball in play. It was an infield hit, and he hustled down the line, and Bobby Wood ended up scoring on it. So, shout out Stephen Kwan for that because it gave us one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting, All-Star game ending in the history of the sport. So in years past, when the All-Star game is tied after 9 innings, they've just called it a tie. It happened in 2002 because they run out of bullpen arms. There aren't any guys left to pitch. So you call it a tie and no one goes home happy. They changed it so that it is now a swing off. And so the rules for this were, three batters from each team are chosen by the managers. Each batter gets three swings to hit as many home runs, or they can hit three home runs, basically. So you get three swings, it's either a home run or an out. And you alternate batters. So it went AL, NL, AL, NL, AL, NL this year. And it was awesome. I loved it so much. Um, that said, I've seen people, talk about implementing it in regular season games, and I don't really want to see that happen. I think, um, then regular season games have the opportunity to become sort of a crapshoot. Um, if you don't win it in nine, which I don't really love,
it's
maybe.
it's like an arcade game, you know. I don't know if you ever played Mario's baseball
Mhm.
growing up. But it's like there were so many different modes you could play, and like yeah, you could just set the game to just so many different rules, and I don't know. It kind of feels like an arcade game if they have it be a swing off in a regular game. That's just my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah. If they do implement it, I hope it's, after 12, like let's say we go 12 innings and we still don't, it's still tied. Then maybe I could see going to it because you've played, you know, three extra innings of baseball. So, then at that point, maybe you go to a swing off, but I don't think you do it immediately after 9 innings. And I definitely hope, while Rob Manfred has made a lot of really good changes for the game, I hope that this is not one that he considers making. Um, like I said, it was perfect for the All-Star game, perfect for an exhibition game because it was a super exciting ending. A little bit anticlimactic because Junior Caminero, or not Junior Caminero, sorry, Jonathan Aranda was the last AL batter, and he didn't hit a single home run. So we didn't even get to see Pete Alonso take any swings because Kyle Schwarber, right before Jonathan Aranda went 3 for 3 and shut the door on the AL. And I mean, the Kyle Schwarber round, if they had ended on the Kyle Schwarber round, if he needed to go 3 for 3, it probably would have been, one of the coolest things I've ever seen on a baseball diamond. Sadly, it didn't end up being that way, but Schwarber still goes 3 for 3. He wins the All Star Game MVP for that performance. There's some debate, should he have won it because of how he performed in the swing off? I don't really care to get into that. I don't care either way. It's the All Star Game MVP. I think there's like a little bit of a cash bonus, but these guys are making so much money that who cares if one player gets an extra $1 million over another guy? It's a drop in the bucket for those guys. But yeah, I really loved the swing off in the context of an exhibition game.
Yeah, for sure. I think the positive thing is that when Rob Manfred wants to see a rule implemented, he tests it in the minor leagues first.
Right.
So we're gonna know about it like way ahead of time if that's ever gonna be a thing. And I do like that he's testing things out a little bit more aggressively in the exhibition games. That
Hmm.
way temperature reading on like what people think about it, and if
Right.
it's a viable option going forward to start testing a little bit more rigorously in the minor leagues. So
Yeah.
I think Manfred, like, people hate on him a lot, but he does have he is very calculated in the way he
Hmm.
does. You know, that's something to respect about him. I'll leave it at that. So
Yeah. Yeah. And, we've gotten into the pitch clock and all of that in earlier episodes. But yeah, I think Rob Manfred has done a decent job as the commissioner of baseball, all things considered. I know a lot of people are you know, not fans of him, but strictly from what he's done for the game of baseball with the pitch clock and things like that, I think he's been really good. And, they did ABS in the All-Star game this year. It looks like we're probably going to see that in the major leagues in 2026. And I think that's another really great change for the game.
uh,
Um, that's something that we've needed for a long time. And, now that we have the technology to do it, I think it's time to implement it. But
yeah,
that's all I have on the All-Star game. Do you have anything else?
yeah, just to kind of add on what you're saying, it's not related to the All-Star game, but I think the ABS system will be kind of like how like the instant replay system was like, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago.
Hmm.
You had that perfect game, that 28 out perfect game that was thrown by Armando Galarraga in
Hmm.
2010 against, ironically, against the Indians, but um the instant replay didn't exist back then, and that would have been a perfect game if there had been instant replay. So
Right.
it's little things like that, they add up a lot. And I think it's a really positive thing to have ABS in the league. So yeah, that's all I have to add on to that. So
Yeah, well, that'll do it for us this week. Next week we're going to be back on our regularly scheduled release date. So next episode will be out Tuesday of next week. That said, we're not going to have a ton of Reds and Guardians stuff to cover. It'll just be one weekend series for us to cover each. So we're going to do another mailbag episode next week. So if you have questions or thoughts that you would like to hear us discuss or anything you want answered, comment them on Spotify or on Apple or on YouTube. We'll take a look at those and try to answer, any questions or thoughts you might have, thoughts about the deadline or, questions about, a specific stat we use and why we use it, why we like it, or, just questions about, you know, our baseball fandom would be super fun to answer too. So, leave a comment. We would love to answer questions.
yeah, thanks for listening. Appreciate it. This was a fun episode to do. Ended up covering a lot of ground on some interesting draft and All-Star game topics. So yeah, it was
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, ton of fun. And like I said, we'll be back in your feeds Tuesday of next week, back on the regularly scheduled program. Thanks so much for listening to episode 25 of One American Baseball Podcast.